Okay, welcome, welcome, one and all. Class number 3, I believe, of Awakening Breath. We're looking at the 16 exercises of Anapanasati as shared in the Anapanasati Sutta. So let's go to the board here. So sharing the screen. All right. Let's make sure we're on the right screen. Okay. One and good. Okay. We're all seeing the same thing here. Awakening breath. Here we go. So today we're going to be working with the mental formations. We're on the second tetrad. So what does that mean, the second tetrad? So I think I'm just going to kind of keep this map going as we go through. So thus far, this is where we are on the overall map. The first, let's see, can I get the, just want to see if I can get my pointer. Oh, well. First class, we kind of looked at this, the body, the first tetrad, or Vedenaanupassana, mindfulness of breath in the body. Long breath, short breath, working with the whole body of breath, whether that's noticing the full experience of every aspect of the breath, be it the in-breath, the top of the in-breath, the out-breath, or the base of the out-breath, and or the interpretation of having this even coverage, awareness of the body as we breathe. And then there is the calming of the bodily fabrications, whatever it is that the body is creating. So some people interpret that as calming the fabrication of the breath itself. How is it that we can make the breath more subtly indiscernible? Or some people have interpreted calming the bodily fabrications to mean calming whatever it is that arises in the body, which that makes sense to me, since we sit down and then what happens? We feel a little agitated. And then we started to talk about the hindrances. We start to feel the effects of craving, aversion, unconsciousness slash sloth and torpor, lethargy, restlessness, agitation in the body, maybe the anxiety that shows up in the body, doubt, and any of the experiences that make us want to kind of roll up the mat, as it were. So, how is it that these expressions show up within the body, and how can we bring some of the calming to them? So, this was a bit of the shamatha. So, shamatha means calm abiding. It's the aspect, or it's the quality of mind that is, I guess, the opposite of urgency. It's that sense of being able to bring that calm abiding, be in contact with what is, but not have it trigger some kind of reactivity. How is it that we can notice the calming qualities, the pleasant qualities of what we're paying attention to? And then, paying attention to these gladdening and balancing qualities of the breath. But then eventually, these things come up, the hindrances come up to try to throw us off the path. And they're deeply ingrained, they're deeply conditioned. And so, it's like we're bringing the tank of air on us as we go into the water, scuba diving. So as we are swimming along and excavating and contacting these hindrances, we're bringing this tank of calmness with us, so we can be able to contact and direct some of this to bring to, how should we say, quell, neutralize, or quantumize the urgency that might arise around these. So then the discomfort that they may bring may dissipate, so they themselves are no longer a problem, or maybe even the hindrances themselves, those agitating, disrupting, distracting qualities, can begin to just move away on their own. Yeah. So here we see, we're inclining ourselves towards a particular feel tone. So this second tetrad, or Vedenaanupassana, tracking, paying attention to observing the feeling tone of breath. So within this, noticing the calming qualities, the pleasant qualities, that's what induces the shamatha. And then that begins to increase the sense of, yeah, what's the pleasantness that's being increased here? So then we move into the Piti and sukkha, rapture and happiness, as it's often translated. I liked how we ended the conversation last time about really kind of teasing apart. Maybe it's more excitement and contentment. You know, it's the excitement, the thrill sometimes that can happen when we can contact certain energetic expressions that arise when concentration is sufficient. And then how can we extract that agitating quality so we can allow ourselves to actually take in, derive some degree of satisfaction, contentment from the joyful quality there. So this is where we're leading. We'll go into it, but this is where we are now. This leads us to exercise 7 and 8. Breathing in, we're going to be working with becoming more sensitive to the mental formations, and then calming the mental formations. Yeah. So as we can see here, we're in the body and we're already inclining ourselves towards the feel tone, pleasant feel tone qualities. And here we are in the feel tone category, and we're stoking the pleasant feel tones. And then we move into the mental formations, which is we're already kind of entering into the mind here, even though we're technically not in the mind category yet. So it's kind of an interesting way here, an interesting thing. So here's a quote widely attributed to Mark Twain, taken from Reader's Digest, April 1934, where he said, "I'm an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened." So this is something I often butcher the quote. So I tried to look for the exact quote, and apparently there's not an absolute confirmation that he's the one that said this, but it's mostly attributed to him. So here we are. Looking at the experience of the mind and being able to, not suffer because of it. I mean, when we look at the majority of the suffering that we go through within our lives, it's all pretty much the mental experience. Not all of it, but I'd say a significant amount of it. Oftentimes, when we have some sort of anticipatory anxiety about some event in the future, it seems horrible. And then oftentimes when we're in actually experiencing that event in the present moment, we might have a sense of, well, this is tough, but it's not that horrible. It's like the horrible part was really in the anticipation prior to. What's happening in the mind really influences so much of this sense of the suffering, the discontent, the stress that we feel. So the exact uh, um, exercises as typified in the sutta. Exercise 7, one trains oneself. I will breathe in sensitive to mental fabrications. One trains oneself. I will breathe out sensitive to mental fabrications. Exercise 8, one trains oneself. I will breathe in calming mental fabrications. One trains oneself. I will breathe out calming mental fabrications. So again, overview. So the progression of practice, 1 through 3, shamatha, the calm abiding. 4 through 6, we're moving into jhana. So the shamatha is we're cultivating concentration by calming the mind. Within Buddhist psychology, the mind's natural state is concentration when we can extract the agitating qualities. So that shamatha is about extracting the agitating qualities so the mind can come to rest. And then jhana is, we're taking that quality, those qualities of concentration, of well-being, of the shamatha expressions of those joyful, pleasant qualities, and really stoking them so we can get a deeper state of concentration. And then 7 and 8, exercise 7 and 8 that we're doing today, we're starting to move into vipassana, the insight traditions. So shamatha, again, to define the settling, calming, resolving of an issue. Yeah, that's one of the definitions, of resolving of an issue. Whenever we have an issue or a problem, there's that sense of urgency. Yeah, so the shamatha is taking out that quality. All right, there's an itch. Yeah, I don't necessarily need to scratch it. Okay, there's a discomfort over in my leg. I don't need to do anything about it. We can just kind of be with our experience without having that stressful urgency. The jhana is cultivation of deep states of concentration. And then vipassana, which we're starting to lean into today, to see clearly, to see through. So much of the architecture of this practice is how is it that we can make this body settled, clarified, and to become a safe and pleasant abiding, so it's less distracted by the mind. So then when we ultimately turn our attention towards the mind, the waters are less muddied, so we can more clearly see what is taking place. So that's what vipassana means, to see clearly, to clarify our experience. How is it that we can have an increased sensory clarity of what is? And also to see clearly in terms of to see through. How is it that we can make transparent a lot of our perceptions, a lot of our reactivity, a lot of our drivenness that comes up? And this is one of the things we're going to be looking at today, this drivenness, these conditioned formations of intentionality. That transition from, oh, that's a thought to, oh, that's a good idea. How is it that we can see through that? So we can see it for what it is. So we're trying to see our delusions, our false perceptions, and our attachment to suffering. And the Buddha asks us to not to identify with these things. So this is a big step in practice. We're looking at how we get caught up in the veil of static, rumination, the web of mind that we mistake for ourselves. So what percentage of the day are you caught in rumination? And how real does that feel? And what is the price we pay for being stuck in our ruminations, so to speak? Yeah. So we're trying to go beyond, going beyond seeing through our rumination is a big step towards liberation. So here we have my doodle on the whiteboard here. Um, this is a common one. So again, for people who studied with me for a while, this all looks familiar. So for some of you, will be new. For some of you, this will be review. For those of whom this is review, just reflect upon the depth and wisdom of your experience, how it has grown and deepened since the last time we spoke about this. So the sankharas, yeah, so the formations, breathing in, breathing out, sensitive to the mental formations. This means different things. Or it's translated differently. Sometimes deeply conditioned intentions, deeply conditioned formations, fabrications. Well, then there's this one term, the sense impressions. And I like that. So we can start off with this. The momentary sense impressions. So we have the flower. Bing, that's the thing. That's what's expressed at the top. We have the roots that are deep, that grows the stalk, and then bing, it pops up the flower. So that's the most superficial aspect of this, which is the sense impressions. Moment by moment, we have our internal seeing of our images of the mind's eye, the internal talk of our thoughts, and maybe some of the emotive responses to what's taking place. So, this momentary sense impressions. So, whenever we're lost in rumination or thinking, that's pretty much what's happening. It's this bopping back and forth between the internal seeing of our images, the internal hearing of our inner talk, and then the emotions that's happening. And it's just like awareness is just ping ponging back and forth, and it begins to or awareness begins to map together or weave together this experience where we are participating in some sort of story. Yeah. So if we travel down the stalk of the flower and down into the roots, then we're kind of getting at the core of it. So sense impression, and that term impression also has a different connotation of an imprint. So like when there's a coin or a piece of or some sort of yeah metallic relief, they talk about that being an impression. There's an impression upon that metal or an imprint. So what are these? There are deeper conditioning experiences that we have that influence how it is that we are experiencing things. So, this can go as deep as our attachment styles or whatever life experiences that we have that we're making these deep associations. So, these deeply conditioned associations. As I was doodling this board, a song came up on the radio that is, by all objectively speaking, probably a very pleasant song, but I had a very deeply associated negative reaction to it. This is a song that an old ex-girlfriend would play with some frequency. It was just a very negative relationship. And obviously that deep connection shows up. Oh, here's the song. I can probably like the song sometime, but there's such this negative association with it. It's like, nope, skip. don't want to go through that again. So here we have it. It's the song comes on, and then there's the subtle sense impression of yuck in the body. Maybe then some subtle images of memories of recalling, you know, the playing of that song, but then just being aware of the environment and the tension that was going on in the relationship, just the unpleasantness that I was feeling at the time. So there's these subtle sense impressions of of my internal hearing, seeing, and feeling that was going on. That's just the expression of this deeper root of a deep conditioned association. Yeah. So I have this arrow pointing over here. Forgive me, I'm not going left to right, top to bottom. Um, so there's this another expression of the formations or the sankharas is this conditioned association and how it really um, talks about what's the word I'm looking for, um, where there's an intentionality of volition. Yeah. So it's like I'm talking a little bit over here about perception and conditioned perception, but then there's the volition piece. Yeah. So back in olden times, when they're talking about sankaras, they'll use this analogy of the wagon wheel. So looking at South Asia, um, you know, dry plains that are also subject to torrential downpours of rain season. So let's just say we have a dry a bed of soil, and then rain comes down, makes it all very, very wet. A wagon wheel goes through. And what's it do? It leaves this imprint. The sun comes out, it bakes it, so it bakes this imprint into the ground. So the next time the rain comes, where does the rain fall into? The rain falls into that trough that's made. And then the water erosion makes it even deeper. And then the sun comes out and bakes it. So when the wagon is going across the plains, what does it do? The wheel falls into that trough, and then it makes it even deeper. And so back and forth between the rain and the wheel and the sun, it makes this deeper groove. So what's your reactive habits? I like to say that stress is universal and stress touches all of us in our lives, but the way that we react is unique to each of us. What are your reactive patterns? What are your reactive patterns around discontent, around dukkha? So, this is part of what we look at. So the stress happens, and then, boom, we perceive it in a particular way, and then we react in a particular way. And the more that we do that, we're kind of creating the conditions for that to happen again. This is how habits form. When we get into these more deeply ingrained, deeper grooves of habits that seem difficult to get out of. Habits of perception, of behavior, yeah, and really the experience of self and world. So, old, Bronze Age analogy of the wagon wheel, but we can also look at how it still applies today, neurobiology. We have certain actions that we do them with repetition. The brain says, okay, well, I don't need to relearn this. I'm just going to create some neuroarchitecture to support this. Certain curls in my brain that says tying a shoelace, being able to remember Photoshop, so the more that we engage in a behavior, it's just like we have more gray matter in the brain that supports that. So certain neural pathways, the Rick Hansen quote, neurons that fire together, wire together. Yeah. So we have a lot of specific pathways associated with our behavior, perception and behavior. And, the more that's built and reinforced, the harder it is to get out of that, the harder it is to change that. So this is part of what we're looking at here is our deep volitions and how to change them. Sometimes it's said that the path or the practice um, is to uproot avijja sankhara, these terms, sankhara and avijja. So the formations, that's the habit, that's the tendency, the volition. That's not the full problem. The other part of the problem is the avijja or the ignorance. So we don't know. We don't know what's happening. So a pattern of reactivity comes and somehow we go to sleep to it and then it takes over. And so I have here a little doodle. It's supposed to be a mosquito. So it's like, the first thing that the mosquito does when it lands on your skin gives you a little anesthesia that just says, you know what, I'm not here. Just don't pay attention to this. you you have no idea that I am about to suck your blood and give you malaria, etc. So this is what happens. The habit pattern of reactivity comes up, and then we kind of go to sleep to it, and boom, we take over. It takes over, yeah, and we kind of identify with it. So how many times have you engaged in some kind of habit pattern of anger or anxiety, or based on craving, aversion, what have you, where there's a part of you that's watching you engage, and you're like, gosh, stop, stop already. But you feel powerless to it because you're so identified with that volition. So, kind of a big subject. We're talking about really rewiring our deep habitual volitional responses or reactions, unconscious reactions to the world, whether it's in our actions, our speech, or just the way that we perceive. No small task. And so this was part of Buddha's paradox of becoming. How is it that how is it that we can be able to shift and change a lot of our perception and behavior if we're only identified with it? That's all we know when it's happening. So this is part of the architecture of the Anapanasati practice. Can we get ourselves into a sufficiently calm, mellowed out place so that when these sense impressions come up, we can just see them for what they are? Oh, that's just a moment of seeing. That's just an image that I see. Oh, okay, that's just an internal talk that I hear, and I'll let it go. Oh, okay, that's just a feeling, sensation, some kind of drive. I don't have to engage it. I can let it go. The more that we can sit back and observe in this way, we can see these habit patterns arise as for what they are and not engage in them, allow them to fall. So this practice allows us to see our deep conditions. Yeah? Any questions on that before I move forward?
I had one question. Do you ever find that, like, as we notice some of the habitual patterns and some of them fade away, it's almost as if new ones or ones that were kind of below the base layer appear, if you will, like, or deeper in the wagon wheel rut?
Like kind of like some deeper ones that happen that are kind of almost a little bit worse in a way.
Not necessarily better or worse, just different. Like, okay, you started to notice the autopilot item. You're past ignorance and you're noticing the repeating patterns, and some of them have even dissipated, but then there are new ones that were on autopilot that you weren't aware of before.
Yeah. Now then, let me ask you: do they feel related to the ones that were just kind of worked through, like almost like it's a deeper layer of that particular drive or perception, but it just shows up in a different way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that can definitely happen for sure. There's a teacher of mine, Shinzen Yang. He comes up with this analogy. I quote it I quote it somewhat regularly. It's a very awkward, weird one, but I just find it just so appropriate. So picture, if you will, Superman hanging out in the Fortress of Solitude, goes over to the coastline, just dangling his legs off of a glacier, looking out on the wonderful ocean, and then an iceberg floats by, blocking his view. So he takes his little X-ray laser beams eyes and just kind of like line by line, just melts it down. And just for a little while, good, the iceberg is melted. It's all open and fresh and free. And then boom, that next deeper level of the iceberg surfaces, and it's wider. The tip was like only this much, and since that part is gone, what comes up is a little bit deeper, wider. So it's all connected. So then what's he do? You just constantly kind of work with it, work with it, work with it to kind of melt it down until that iceberg is completely gone. So yes, we can have sometimes an expression of some behavior, some volition, some habit pattern, and we can work through it, and then things can feel open and fluid and flowing for a while, and then sometimes boom, that habit pattern can come back. And so, or it can show up in a different manifestation, but it somehow feels or seems related. And that can show up in the cushion, like sometimes we're working on something in our meditation. We feel like we've kind of processed or digested that karmic knot of experience. And then, wow, all these wonderful things are open and available for the sitting for a while. And then one day we sit down on the cushion and it's like it's our first day. The mind is scattered. We're all over the place, achy and restless. It's like that deeper iceberg has shown up. So that's one expression of it for sure. And then also other expressions are that, yeah, sometimes we might have some kind of habit pattern and we kind of work through it, but there is some deep drive that then just kind of connects with some other expression, you know? So it can be a completely different habit that shows up. So how's it that we can get to the core? How's it that we can get to the core of that driver sensation or that reactivity? Um, so yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and that's definitely something that happens. Um, um, okay, great. So does that answer your question appropriately? Does that feel okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so
Mike, I had a quick question.
yeah,
Just back to that picture that the slide you just had up. So that kind of feels like that's like the heart of what we're doing here. That piece that you just covered, kind of really getting into the nitty gritty of our habit patterns, right? Essentially.
yes,
Okay. And then, so that's where we would also then obviously work with the hindrances. So everything or whatever comes up.
yeah.
Okay.
So thank you for bringing up the hindrances. So we were looking before at the calming of the bodily fabrications and opening up to the hindrances that way. How does restlessness show up in the body? How does doubt show up in the body? What does that feel like? How does the lethargy show up in terms of, the unconsciousness in terms of lethargy and sloth and torpor? Now, how does it show up in the mind? What is the experience of restlessness in the mind? What is the experience of doubt, of agitation, of anxiety, etc.? How do they show up? So, what I'm doing, what I'm looking at here, the see, hear, feel, these are kind of the jug handles. We can kind of actually contact, they're tangible, there's something that we can see. And when we can start to kind of contact the superficial expression of the formations and not react and not go to sleep to it, then we can start to see maybe some of these habits play out or want to play out, or we can see kind of the different expressions. This is what it's like in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, 5, and release. So yeah, so we're getting into the nitty gritty of our experience here for sure.
Thanks.
Good. Okay, so let's see what I have here. Calming the breath is one thing, calming restlessness is another, but calming the mental formations sets up new pattern results in. Sometimes I cut and paste my notes and I'm like, what was I trying to say here? The goal of the practice in many suttas to uproot avijja sankhara. So that's what I was looking at there. How is it that we can work through that ignorance of avijja and be able to uproot that deep volitional habit pattern of sankhara? So this is the practice, the nitty gritty you're talking about, to discern. Can we notice this activity happening? Can we penetrate it? That is to say, rather than go to sleep and it takes over, no, we can kind of see through it. This is the seeing through. And then notice the impermanence. I don't need to fall prey to it. I don't need to succumb to it. I can just allow it to be there, and then I can notice how it just wants to come into being, pass away from being. There's an inherent impermanence in it. And then there's this term viraja or viraga, meaning dispassion. So all the while that it's happening, it might be goading you, identify with me, yes, say yes to this. Whether it's just a simple falling into fantasy, planning, daydream, or deeper patterns around anxiety, anger, sadness, what have you. But how is it that we can cultivate this dispassion, this non want to connect or identify with it, until we can relinquish? They have that expression of the momentary passing of it. Yeah? So that's what we're going to be practicing doing in terms of noticing and calming the bodily fabrications. So discerning, how can we understand what is arising in the seeing, hearing, feeling space? Penetrate, going into it from the ego self to the sensory system. Yeah, so this is we're moving. I like to say that we normally look at ourselves in terms of we're an ego-based system. You know, this is me and the world, and I am the main actor in my story, and me. And I engage in the world through thoughts, ideas, concepts that center around this locus of identity of self. So we're dropping from that into, can we just kind of hang out in the nervous system and observing the zeros and ones, the activation and remission of sensations of the nervous system, and just not have any interest in the story. Just notice what's arising, what's passing away, what's arising, what's passing away. Yeah, so we're going from an ego-based self to a sensory system-based self. Yeah? So this requires equanimity. Means whatever arises, can we meet it with a sense of acceptance, that dispassion, full acceptance, allowing and letting go. Yeah? So the impermanence, noting the rise and fall, just become curious. Become curious about this experience of this image, this experience of this sensation in the body. Note the intensity, location, the duration. And this all leads to anatta, or not self. I'm breaking my identification with the experience. And then we allow it to pass. The identity and the event have become disentangled. Okay. So this little doodle right here, paying attention to the whiteboard, we have this figure who's just kind of sitting, meditating here. And so we're looking at these toggle points of the sankharas. You know, so it's the seeing, hearing, feeling. So let's start with the bottom one, feeling. So really meaning any sensation within the body. So here we have this kind of like whatever, this movement of the heart. There's the local sensation right in the heart center. Oh, now it's kind of becoming more of this global, wider sensation being felt through, just noticing the sensations, the sensations within the body. But then being aware of the mind-body experience within the mind. Well, no matter how sophisticated, multifaceted, and nuanced our thought process is, we can reduce it down to two elements. There's the element of seeing. There's the visualizing of whatever it is that we're participating in, be it the fantasy, the planning, the daydream. So over here, you know, this person has this kind of general mental picture plane where they're thinking about an ice cream cone. Yeah? So most of us have this kind of region somewhere. Most people report somewhere around the eyes, the forehead, wherever it is for you that you see your thoughts. Now then, some people are very highly visual thinkers, and some people are wired not to be much visual thinkers. So if you are aware of your general seeing space of the mind, ain't nothing happening. You're just looking at the backs of your eyelids. Don't think that you're doing it wrong. Just means that's what you're wired. You're wired more towards verbal thought. So this is the hearing experience here. So most people report somewhere between the ears and the back of the head there. That's where we hear our conversations, our commentaries, our dialogues, monologues, diatribes, the inner critic, all those things. You know, people hear it in between the ears and the back of the head here. So we're just kind of free floating between the body mind experience, between the internal seeing, hearing, and feeling. Yeah, so this is a way that we can kind of get some contact, a tangible contact with the sankharas, or the more superficial experience of the sense impressions. Does that make sense to people? Questions on that? Okay. Let's see, this here is from Ajahn Amaro. He says, Fra Payutto points out in his book, Dependent Origination, that when it is said that with the cessation of ignorance, there's the cessation of sankhara. With the cessation, you know, of vijja sankhara, with the cessation of ignorance, there's the cessation of those volitional drives. With the cessation of sankhara, the mental formations, there's the cessation of consciousness, and so forth. It's not just cessation in terms of something having begun and ending, it's also nirodha, meaning cessation, yeah, which implies non-arising. So when there's no ignorance, then sankharas do not arise. The mind does not create the world of thingness, of this and thatness. It's the realization of Dhamma. It's just Dhamma. It's not fabricated, not divided, not created. It's not split into me here and the world out there, a subject separated from an object. This is the peace and clarity of realizing the Dhamma here and now, seeing clearly into causation. Yeah. So, no small task for sure. We are noticing just the rise and fall. seeing, hearing, feeling experience, but that can really augur very, very deeply into this whole sense of self and world. You know? And in the process, we are cleansing, purifying our habits. Sound good? So that last piece there, when I was explaining kind of the seeing, hearing, feeling experience, does anybody have any questions on that? Is everybody clear on that?
Just leave it.
Yep. Is that a question that I'm hearing, or is somebody just kind of showing us what's on TV? All right, then. I'll assume it's the latter. Okay. All right. If anybody has a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll just go right into it.
I have a quick question, Michael.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about some people are more visual thinkers and some people are more audio thinkers, and we're just wired that way. Is that do we know if that's something that's we're conditioned to be that way, or it's like we're hardwired that way from the beginning? Or do they even know that yet?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say it would probably be a little bit of both, maybe. Well, hold on a second. You are an artist. You're a painter, and from my understanding, you report not having a lot of image-based thinking. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Likewise, I consider myself an artist, etc., and I have a lot of visual thinking. So part of me, I guess, previously would thought, well, because I deal with images a lot, maybe I'm training that part of the mind to really become a little bit more, there's a little bit more gray matter there, or there's a little bit more sensitivity that has grown there. But I guess it's not the case, because if you're a painter, you're very visual, in your arts and your expression, but it's not necessarily the way in which you take in and process information in your thinking. So I guess that shoots that theory down, which would make me inclined to think, and this is based on absolutely nothing, but I'm inclined to think that we just kind of come into the world that way, just like our temperament, personality, such like that. Yeah.
Until you mentioned it with the picture of the guy that had a lot of lorem ipsum going on, the question never occurred to me. Then I was just like, I wonder, I'm like, is that even a thing that's been studied or at all or anything?
Yeah. Well, I put it out there to the community. If anybody has any awareness of any research that shows a dominance of people's thinking, be it verbal or auditory or visual, feel free to post that on the Google Class. I think that'd be interesting.
Last time we talked about it a while back, right? And I brought it up to my sitting group, and everyone was shocked that everybody else didn't just process information all visually or all audio or half and half. Like everybody's just surprised that we didn't all think exactly the same.
Yeah.
Which was kind of a cool conversation.
It is pretty interesting. This is part of what I enjoy about this particular practice is we start to notice how our nervous system just works differently than everybody else. We're all kind of wired a little bit differently, and we can all notice kind of how we take in and process information. We can start to see how we're all a little bit more neurodivergent than we might have initially thought. Okay, cool. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, allow yourself to come to an upright, comfortable position. Allow yourself to straighten up and settle in. Settling into posture, allowing yourself to find a place of stillness. The more still we can maintain our posture, the more we can notice the subtlety of our experience. And we begin to turn our attention towards the breath. So, we'll be doing a little bit of an abbreviation of the previous exercises, but just allowing your breath to just be its natural pacing. So we can enter into the exercise paying attention to the full body breath, breathing in, breathing out, paying attention to the full body. So the full body breath, the inhale, the top of the inhale, the exhale, the base of the exhale. The more that you can just allow yourself to become very interested, curious, intrigued by every nuance of this cycle of breath. It's like we're allowing it to take up all of our mental real estate so that there's less opportunity for distraction to happen. So tracking, following every little bit of the breath there and noticing what are the pleasant qualities that arise from attuning to breath in this way. And how those pleasant qualities may shift or change depending on what point of the cycle of breath we are currently experiencing. And discerning the pleasant qualities, the pleasant feeling tone that arises from attuning to breath this way, and giving yourself permission to feel that. So, the other interpretation of the whole body of breath, opening up the scope of focus to include the full body, allowing this breath to be a full body experience, the ways that breath ripples through the body, the pleasant feel tones that arise and ripple through the full body. Again, allowing yourself to just get into the yumminess of the experience here. Shedding any tension, just relaxing, releasing, letting go. So again, the discerning and giving self permission to feel. So the discerning, increasing your sensory clarity. What is it that you notice? Allowing yourself to get into so much of the subtle nuances of breath and body. Giving yourself permission to feel, regardless if it's subtle or fleeting. Just acknowledging and allowing. So here we have this sensory clarity, can induce, create, support this acceptance or equanimity. It facilitates and allows this concentration to establish. Breathing in, breathing out, calming the bodily fabrications. So, any of these hindrances wanting to pop up, craving the aversion, lethargy, restlessness, doubt, how does that show up in the body? If ain't much there, then great. Continue to imbue your experience with this wakefulness, this alertness, this brightness, this acceptance, allowing of the breath. But then we can notice maybe there's these subtle hindrances there. Can we be aware of them, contact them, but bring this sense of acceptance, equanimity? I can maybe allow them to fall away. Sometimes just merely clearly seeing what's taking place allows a relinquishing to happen. Good. So just allowing that to be in the background. Just really tuning yourself back to the pleasant qualities of breath. So breathing in, breathing out, being sensitive to Piti. And then this may or may not occur for people. The more that concentration happens, the more that we can attune ourselves to the pleasant embodying that may begin to take a momentum. So, what we can do to incline that is just set up a positive feedback loop. Whatever you notice that is pleasant, the pleasant feel tone that arises from breath, from calm abiding, give yourself permission to appreciate that. Take that moment of joy in, which creates another joyful, pleasant moment, which we can give ourselves permission to feel, which creates another pleasant moment. So, setting this positive feedback loop. Maybe that joyful quality can take on a momentum of its own. Again, it can be subtle, fleeting, but just inclining yourself to create the conditions. Breathing in, breathing out, being sensitive to sukkha or happiness. So part of this, creating this positive feedback loop, well, that's all well and good, but can we derive any contentment, some satisfaction from that? Can you allow yourself to feel that in a skillful way? Well, there's a wholesome, skillful, pleasant abiding. Just the drinking of the water and the feeling of the refreshment. Can we allow ourselves to derive some satisfaction? Not needing anything else in this moment. Being content with sitting still and tuning to our breath. That's all we need. Okay, good. So all we're doing here is just creating the body as a safe and pleasant abiding. And we can attune ourselves to breathing in, breathing out, being aware of the mental formations. So as described earlier, we have the seeing space of the mind's eye, this general region where the mind projects images associated with fantasy, planning, daydream. Just be aware of this general seeing space. Maybe images are happening, maybe not, but just partial awareness here. And partial awareness in the hearing space of the mind. Most people report somewhere between the ears, back of the head is where they hear their thoughts, their verbal thinking. Partial awareness here. And to integrate with the body, partial awareness in this whole feeling form of the body. So we have this attention spread between these three jug handles of seeing, hearing, and feeling. So I know we're juggling a few balls here, but how can we simplify? Like a cat sitting in front of three mouse holes, just being leisurely, as the attention moves from one mouse hole to the next, just noticing maybe there's some activity, maybe not. I allow my awareness to free float between seeing, hearing, and feeling. And if it helps, you can make a label. You can label see, hear, or feel, depending on where your attention is drawn. So as I'm just allowing my awareness to do its thing, I'm just paying attention to it. I'm not going asleep. And I'm labeling accordingly. So it might sound like this. Feel. See. See and feel. Hear. All three. Feel. See. And so on like that. So the best of your ability, just label wherever your attention is pulled between seeing, hearing, and feeling. Now then, sometimes when we engage in the see, hear, feel practice, that might make the thoughts go a little wild. So try not to fall down the rabbit hole of every bit of thought that's happening. We're trying to be awake, not have the avijja, the ignorance, kick in. This is the wakeful quality. We're clearly seeing what's taking place in each moment. And in each moment, there's the rise and fall of the different formations, the different sankharas. So we stand back, awake, simply noting, see, hear, or feel. Breathing in and out, calming the mental formations. So every moment of contact, we bring this sense of acceptance, equanimity, and facilitates the dispassion, the allowing, the letting go. And not all the time is there activity. Sometimes it's restful. Sometimes in C space, it's just rest, nothing happening, just the backs of your eyelids. Sometimes in hear space, it's restful, quiet in between the ears. Sometimes in feel space, we're reconnecting with the restful qualities in the body. So sometimes just being aware of the rest states, the rest and that may naturally occur in see, hear, or feel. The gaps, the spaciousness that may incline a little bit more rest. And whatever occurs, be it active or restful, we meet it with a sense of acceptance, allowing non-reactivity. Inclining ourselves to notice rest and see, hear, or feel. So just in the way that we're noticing and appreciating the calming qualities within the body and how that may incline ourselves to have a little bit more calm in the body. And noticing the moments of calm, or the gaps between thoughts and seeing and hearing, may incline ourselves to experience a little bit more calming in the mind as well. Just attune yourself to the theme of calm when it naturally occurs. Just meeting it with this acceptance, allowing. allowing awareness to be there without grasping, gripping onto anything. Awake, vibrant, alive, non-clinging, non-reacting. Okay, at ease, everybody. Okay, so a sincere thank you to everybody for participating in this evening's program. So hopefully you can engage in that practice this week. So again, the 16 exercises of Anapanasati, like as we're seeing, there's this progression of how one exercise kind of builds upon and supports the next. So as we're getting into other material, the more that you can kind of engage and become familiar with these exercises, it'll help when we move to the next. Okay, so we can end the evening on the dedication of merit. By the merits of these acts and other such virtues, may we attain a liberation for the benefit of all beings. We bow before those who come before us on the path, after us, and to those who walk beside us on the path. Okay, thank you, everybody. Hope to see you next week. Take care.